Welcome back to Couch Decoders. In this module, we're going to learn how to count in BigQuery. Let's get started. So for our module, it's broken up into two parts. This first part, which we're in right now, is learn how to count in BigQuery. This is going to take about 15 minutes. We'll go over some of the basics like we normally do in the PowerPoint, and then look at a few examples on the BigQuery console. Part 2, this is going to be a do-it-yourself. We have 3 really big examples and they kind of build on each other. So that's going to take about 25 minutes just for me to talk about and explain. So you might want to build in another couple of minutes for you to actually go through the problems. So with that, let's get started. Let's go ahead and review the various keywords that we have been using in all of our queries. So we have select. That picks the columns that we want from our data. From, that tells us where our data is coming from. Where is the cousin to select, and instead of selecting your columns vertically, it allows you to filter your data and select your rows horizontally. We just learned group by, and so group by, he's the newest one so far, and what he does is he aggregates or he rolls up our data. So it brings it from one level of detail and then it summarizes the detail. It summarizes the data at a higher level. So group by, we can think, allows you to use aggregate functions like sum, average, and count. And then with group by, whenever you're using it, everybody has a role at the party, is what I like to say. Either you're being aggregated or you're being grouped by. We also have order by. This sorts our data. We've been using him since almost the very beginning. And limit. And we've definitely been using limit all the way through this entire program. And that allows us to reduce the number of rows that we see. And it's really good for exploring data and making sure we're not wasting too much data usage. In this lesson, we're going to introduce something called count distinct. So we have select distinct, and we're familiar with him from Mr. Distinguish. And what that does is it pulls only unique rows. We can apply this distinct modifier in our count function that we've already learned. And to do that, we just do count distinct column name. So if you think about it, you're like, select distinct only pulls unique rows. What does count distinct do? He only counts unique rows. So that's why I put these both together, because they're actually very similar and it's just a modifier for something that we already know. So how to apply distinct in count? So count distinct finds the unique or distinct values and counts them, versus regular count. Regular count counts the number of entries or values in a column, and neither of these include nulls. So count distinct, you think the number of unique days in the data. So if I had every day of the week in my data, if I did count distinct, I would get 7. If I did regular count, it would give me the total number of days in the data. So maybe Monday happens 15 times. So then for Monday, in just regular count, he gets counted 15 times. And count distinct, we just say one Monday, that's it. If you have extra Mondays in there, we don't care about them. You might use count distinct if you want to find the number of unique users in your database. Let's just say you have a website and you say, hey, I want to know how many people are using my website. You would do count distinct users. In comparison, maybe you want to say, I don't care how many individual people are coming. I want to know how much traction my website has gotten. So maybe one person goes to your website 30 times a day. To do that, I would just say, count my users. How many times has anyone popped into my website? So let's jump into BigQuery and do a demonstration on this. So for this example, we're going to look at a couple of things. First, we want to find the unique count of passengers in all of our different trips. Let me change that. We also want to find the number of passenger entries for all taxi trips. And then we want to find the total number of passengers for all taxi trips. So the first thing we want to do is thinking back to our previous lesson of Think Like a Data Analyst. We have find the total. Find the total, that sounds like sum. We have find the number of passenger entries. Find the number, that probably means count. Find the number of unique passengers in all of our trips. That sounds like count distinct. So now that we have prepped in, okay, we have a game plan of what we think we're going to do. Doesn't mean that we're right, but this is how we're going to tackle the problem. Let's go ahead and grab our data. And we're going to put in select. We're just getting him ready. Okay. And so we definitely want passengers. So let's open up our data table and find out what column we need. And we're going to search pass, see what we get. So we have passenger count, payment type. So we definitely want passenger count. Okay. And I'm a little anal retentive, so I'm just gonna type this in. Okay. So let's just pull in passenger count, and then I already know that we have our pickup date time. And let's just do that just so we can look at the data. We're gonna do a limit 10. And let's see what we get. Okay, so we see we have all these different pickup times. So these all indicate these are different taxi trips. For this particular taxi trip, they had one person. For this one, they also had one. This one down here had 3, and the rest are 1s. So what would happen if we did count of this data? If we said count the passengers, what would I get? I would get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And that's because when you do count, it's just saying, I don't care what's inside, I'm just seeing you have a value, and I'm going to count it up. If we did count distinct, it does the same thing, except when it looks at the value, it says, oh, I got a 1, so you're going to be counted 1 time, and all these other ones are going to be ignored because I only want to find the unique. So count distinct would give me 2, a value of 2, because we have the value of 1 and a value of 3. Count would give me 10, and if I summed this, this would give me 4 plus 5 is 9 plus 3 is 12. But this is just on a little sample of the data. So let's get rid of this because we want to look at all of our data. And the first thing it says is find the number of unique passengers. So we're going to say count and then parentheses distinct passenger count. We're going to call this as unique passengers. Then we're going to do count passenger count as total passenger entries. So that's just going to give us a value of 1 for every row where it's not an empty or missing. And then we'll do sum of passenger count. And that is the total passengers. So what is the difference between entries and total passengers? Entry, we're just saying, is there a value? You get a 1 or you get a nothing. Total passenger says, let me look inside and sum up the numbers. And then count distinct, what this guy does is the same thing, but he just says, do you have a value? Yes or no? And have I counted your value before? Yes or no? And then he just counts the unique ones. And then we'll go ahead and we'll run this. So we see for unique passengers, this is the smallest one, and that makes sense because That means if we got all of the unique passengers, there would be 11 different numbers in there. So maybe you have a 1, a 2, a 5, a 6, a 20. Total passengers is basically just how many rows are in the data, non-null rows for total passengers. So if I were to open up this table, go into the details and see the number of rows, I have 275,921,951. And so that's exactly what I have here. And so this number matches this number. That means that every row has a value for total passengers. And then our total passengers right here is much bigger than just the count. That's because we're taking into our minds, not only is there a value, but what is that value? And let me sum it up. And so this one is like 467 million. And just to drive this home, if we were to do select distinct passenger count from our data, what we would expect to find is 11 entries. But let's confirm, because I think seeing is believing. And let's see what we get. So I see right away I have 11 entries, exactly like my count distinct told me. And I see I have a 0 in there, which is surprising. Maybe if in the data, if there's a missing value, it says we're not going to allow missing values, so we're going to put a 0 in for you. That could be a possibility. Looks like it goes all the way up to 9. And then there's this 208, which I think we've seen that before in previous examples. This is probably an error. Or maybe someone has like a party bus, I don't know. Okay, great. So now that we've done that, we're just going to comment this out. Now you might also say, okay, why are we doing these aggregate functions and there's no group by? Well, that's because I just wanted to find the total for all the data. But if I want to split it up, let's just say I want to say, what are the counts by vendor ID? Now what happens is that I get this error that I listed somebody and he doesn't have a role in the party. He's not being grouped. He's not being aggregated. Group by one. Error goes away and I can run it again. And so what this is going to do, so we see for vendor ID 1, he has 10 different unique passengers. Vendor ID 2 has 11. You say, oh, that's weird. Vendor ID 2, I believe he's the one who has that 208, and vendor ID 1 does not. We see the total number of entries, or basically how many rows are for each vendor ID, and we see it's pretty evenly split. And then total passengers, even though the number of rows for vendor ID 1 and vendor ID 2 are similar, we see that the total number of passengers that they're carrying are actually a little bit different. So in this one, vendor ID 1, he has 172 million versus vendor ID 2, who has 295 million. So your thought might be, well, vendor ID 2, it sounds like he's doing a better job because he's carrying more people per trip. He's being more fuel efficient. That could be. It could also be that that 208 that is attached to vendor ID 2, that bad data, maybe he's kind of messing things up and he's getting summed up a bunch of times. We don't know yet, but we'll find out later. In this module, we learned the difference between count and count distinct, and we also reviewed several examples comparing the two in our BigQuery console. So that wraps it up for today's lesson. In our part 2 of this module, you are going to have some opportunity to practice these functions on your own. See you then. I hope you found this video helpful. If you did, I would be so appreciative if you could like the video and subscribe to help me create more content for you. Thank you.